Welcome, it's Jeremy Allen Gould. I'm coming to you today to confirm between God and of man that in fact, the rumors that you have all heard are true. I started this podcast because I freaking love music. I was privileged enough to book amazing artists and bands in the past, and I was lucky enough to stay in touch with many of them to this day. This is a place to hear their stories. Thank you so much for riding along on this journey, and I hope you enjoy what you hear. With that said, the rumors are definitely true. Thank you for tuning in to this latest episode of the Rumors Are True podcast. My name is Jeremy, and today I welcome Kevin Clay. Kevin Clay, you know, is a prolific songwriter of the past 25 plus years, including his time in My Little Dog China, his new project Orthodox Outcast, as well as many other avenues of production and music in general, art as well, and photography. Amazing conversation with this legend. So cool and honored to have had him come on this podcast. So I want to thank you for listening to this latest episode with Kevin Clay. Kevin Clay, thank you so much for coming on my podcast, man. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Jeremy. I appreciate you asking me. So.
Awesome, man. Well, thank you. What's going on in your life currently? What's in your world right now?
I'm really busy, but kind of a good busy. I do a lot of counseling, like spiritual counseling, life counseling, relationships. I've been doing that for a very long time, several decades. I do a lot of kind of spiritual and theological work. I currently have kind of a new thing I'm doing where I work for this bishop and do a catechetical kind of question and answer and help with sermons and things like that. And I do the graphics. I'm always kind of in and out of music, so I've got several music projects going on. My music and then other music that I either produce or co-write. I don't know. I'm always kind of pretty active on social media with photography and poetry and quotes, and currently in the Orthodox Church, so I do a lot of things.
Oh, cool.
There, in that online community, and also, at church and things like that.
That's awesome. Speaking of the Orthodox Church, Friar Chris Foley is the one that hooked us up. Thank you, Chris. Thank you so much. Yeah, man, he randomly just was like, hey, would you ever want to do Kevin Clay? And I'm like, yeah. So he made that work. So I appreciate it, Chris. Let's talk growing up for you, Kevin. Music kind of came into your life, maybe some artists, some records, some bands, some influences, maybe even some shows that kind of pushed you in the path that you went.
Yeah, I think my upbringing kind of explains a lot of how my life turned out, for better and for worse. I've always been a Christian, so I was raised in an independent fundamentalist Baptist church, and that's the only thing I knew of Christianity. In the 1970s, and things were pretty strict, and we thought the Southern Baptists were liberals, and there was us and like 13 other people going to heaven, and we knocked on people's doors at 6 a.m. on a Saturday and tried to get them saved and all that. But it wasn't all bad. I'm very grateful for kind of what it instilled in me in a positive way, just a love for Christ, reading the scriptures, and a very serious approach to the faith that, if you have a relationship with Christ, it should cost some, and that you kind of sell all and follow Christ. And so that kind of devotion and seriousness has always stuck with me. But kind of paradoxically, my home life was very normal, and just kind of suburban middle class. And we watched sitcoms as a family, and sports. As I always say, we were Baptist, but sports was our religion. But musically, my dad really, really loved music. Kind of dressed like Elvis. In fact, Elvis was considered sort of like a family member. So he had every LP and 45, and this is obviously before like VCRs and things like that. And so when Elvis would be on TV, my dad would get one of those old box tape recorders, the cassette.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And so we would all have to be super quiet and tiptoe around the house because we would record the audio of the Elvis anytime Elvis was on TV.
Awesome.
And my dad had a pretty good record collection, kind of what we would call classic rock. And Saturdays was the big chores day where we're supposed to clean the house and everything.
Yeah.
And then you kind of end up where my mom would be somewhere else, and then my dad would just have records going on the big giant record player, and he have laundry baskets and stuff out, playing drums and singing, and
that's awesome.
Of course. And so, and that's kind of, I think that's what instilled in me kind of a love for music. And I remember as a little kid, I used to always look under the record player to see if I could see the band playing.
That's awesome.
And so that's what instilled, I think, a love for music. And then just kind of grew up like everyone else in the 70s and the 80s, just the radio and TV. I think, it was rock and roll primarily, but, I really got into things like a disco. And so I didn't know what I was, kind of into, but it was basically soul music. And rock and roll was obviously the base, but it's interesting, especially being, white suburban middle class. I was really drawn to black TV shows, like Good Times and Sanford and Son. I used to prefer Soul Train over American Bandstand. And so I naturally got into hip hop and rap in the early 80s, and it was definitely, kind of more of a underground type of music. It wasn't mainstream at the time. That didn't become mainstream until groups like Run DMC. Yeah. And especially that song they did with Walk This Way with Aerosmith. Yeah. And then the Beastie Boys and all that. And then it kind of became more mainstream. And so I was really into hip hop and rap. And I think probably what my first kind of, I don't know, maybe you could say religious experience with music, which a lot of people in the Christian music scene was U2. Oh, yeah. And I discovered them in 1983, and they became my favorite band. And it was funny because I primarily listened to hip hop and rap and U2, and then whatever was on the radio. Sure. I loved The Police, Synchronicity, and Michael Jackson and stuff like that. But I think, but then the next kind of change is this kid moved into our town, actually from Alabama, but he had this weird accent that was somewhere a British accent or a surfer, and he actually was a surfer. And he came in with a black trench coat, and he gave me a cassette tape that kind of changed my life forever. On one side, it was Generation X, Valley of the Dolls. Wow. The other side was Sex Pistols, Nevermind the Bullets. And I was like, what is this? And it was it just changed my whole reality. It's kind of cliche, but that's, yeah, I get that. It just changed everything for me. And I kind of had this identity crisis because I was really into hip hop and rap and breakdancing. That's awesome. And then I kind of went punk, and I remember it was a big deal. That was 1984, and I was made the decision to go punk, bought my trench coat, went to the Army surplus store and changed type dress. And then I just found all these bands like Black Flag and Husker Du, and got into skateboarding, like the Bones Brigade. those videos. They were like dubbed VHS tapes.
Yeah.
And just kind of got into really like punk music and punk subculture, and that kind of became my life. I was an athlete, so that was kind of like what I was really doing, was a serious athlete and just kind of growing up. But musically, and that type of thing, kind of going punk and finding alternative music and subculture was kind of the life-changing experience.
Yeah, it sounds like it. What sports were you playing?
My main sports were basketball, tennis, and golf, but I also played baseball, football, soccer, track.
That's cool.
Yeah.
When you kind of delved into the punk world, and I guess kind of went that route, did kids notice? Like, I mean, obviously when you're in athletics, you're kind of in a different echelon of high school, and punk rock is another echelon. Was there a disparity there, or was there anything? Was it cool?
Yeah, it definitely. Where I grew up, there were kind of hard lines of kind of the cliques, I guess you could say, like within the school. Like you had the popular people, and then you had, this was, like I said, kind of the 1980s. There was like Revenge of the Nerds. You remember those movies?
Yeah.
That's very much those were the terminology,
Yeah.
We back then. You just knew who the popular people were. And then you had the nerds. Then you had the burnouts. Those are people who like smoked or something, and that was kind of it. And no one interacted with each other. And so, yeah, the popular kids were pretty much jocks and cheerleaders.
Yeah.
But the thing is, the popular people were also the trendsetters. And for better and for worse, I was, in the popular group and kind of the ringleader. So just like whatever kind of I did, or our friends did, everyone else did.
I got you.
So, I give credit to my friend Chuck Charles. He was the one who had the trench coat first, but I went and got one, and then every day, like 10 more people would have black trench coats.
That's awesome.
And so, yeah, those kind of subcultures intersected in the sense, like you could be a jock, but you also were like a skater.
Yeah.
And
That's cool.
But you were kind of, the thing is, yeah, with your peers, that was totally cool. But we definitely created tension with like the administration, the teachers. They hated us. But didn't care, and it was kind of on purpose. Like, yeah, we were anti-establishment in that sense, and that was our rebellion. Kind of growing up in a suburban small town was, to dress, what they would say like a hoodlum or something.
Yeah, no, I get that. You mentioned some of these bands earlier. Were you getting to see these bands at all at that time? Was there any particular bands that you did get to see that kind of really like blew your mind?
Well, I would have. I had this stupid rule that I would never go to a show until I saw U2 first. Like, why did I do that to myself?
Oh my gosh!
I remember what shows. I know I missed Black Flag. I think Who's for Due, JFA, The Replacements. There's some other shows. Those are amazing shows.
Oh, that sounds.
My friends went. Like, they're like, "Are you going?" I'm like, "Nope, I haven't seen U2 yet." Can you believe that? I missed all of it.
Unbelievable.
So I finally saw U2 in '87. When my unknown favorite band became everyone's favorite band. Totally that guy. So it was weird because no one really had heard about U2, and then the Joshua Tree happened, and so I saw that.
Everyone heard.
And I was able to then see shows after that.
Yeah, man. Well, that's a risk I would have not taken, but I understand.
I regret it forever.
So music comes into your life. Do you start to kind of start little bands at all in that time frame, or are you starting to write music? How's that kind of coming to?
Yeah. Okay. So in 1986, I had a kind of what I called a religious experience. I was kind of getting sort of discontent, I guess you could say, with, I don't know. Just kind of like everything I just described, just sort of like being popular and skating and going from one kind of trend to the next. I don't know, something felt like it was lacking in me. A circle of friends, we spent every single day together, and then one day I just didn't go, hang out, at the half pipe and music going. We played basketball. It was great. And I just kind of lingered around my house, and then one night I kind of had this experience. I think it was real. I think it was the Holy Spirit. I mean, I was always a Christian, but I guess just using simple words, like I just gave my life to Christ. Felt like he already had, my soul, you could say. But just like what I want to do with my life, it was around that time I was thinking about doing something other than sports, because that's what kind of my parents had determined for me, was to play sports, get a scholarship, go as far as I could, and then be a coach. And I was thinking that when I grew up, I wanted to be Bono. So, and I thought I was the only one, A lot of people have that idea. I think that's actually what kind of formed a lot of the Christian music industry.
Oh, yeah.
But I didn't know how to sing or play an instrument. And I remember one time laying in my bed in my basement bedroom, just crying. I wanted to be Bono so bad. I'm going to be Bono. I can't sing. I can't play an instrument. But also what drew me to it was, I was just innocent, naive kid, And I had that kind of simplicity of heart, like bringing people to Jesus. And that's how I saw U2 and what that power. The only reason why I really wanted to get, I think the love for music and art was instilled in me without me realizing it. But I consciously at that time was like, I want to bring people to Christ. And this seems like the best way to do it. Or not necessarily the best way, but, I could just see if you could just get to that place where, you're on stage and you've got fans and they're willing to listen to anything you have to say,
Yeah.
Like that's amazing power. And I wanted to use that power for good. I wanted to bring people to Christ. So that was my motivation. And in this really, and then the following year, that was like 1986, I was 16. Next year, I got deeply more into church and worked at a church camp reluctantly after I graduated high school in 88. And that's, make a long story short, that's where I felt called to full-time ministry.
Wow.
But I was, in the strict Baptist church where rock and roll was considered satanic, and a lot of other things, like walking on the same side of the street of a bar was considered a sin, and
wow,
tons of weird things. But so I was just staying up all night with pastors arguing and wrestling with things, and they're like, well, obviously God has not called you to rock and roll because that's satanic, but God has called you to be a preacher. And anyway, and I gave up music and considered it satanic and became a preacher and started doing that. That was 1988. I think it's 2024. I think that's the year we're in. I still, to a certain extent, anyone who knows me, who's been with me, I still live in that tension of, what really is God want me to do with my life? What really is sinful?
Yeah.
Fully, is rock and roll bad? Or it's okay, but it's a waste of time? Am I supposed to give up everything I love? I don't know. And I've lived kind of in that tension ever since that summer of 1988. And we'll be able to cover certain, aspects of kind of what happened since then, but really can make it very simple. That has shaped my life.
Yeah.
It's just that tension and that sort of confusion and that mixture of sort of like love and fear and like dogmatic certainty that this is it.
Yeah.
But then it falls apart and then you question everything. And I've spent kind of from there on my whole life kind of pursuing things and quitting. And so even all the music I've made is really the act of me like quitting and coming back.
Crazy. That's awesome. I mean, it's like, it's cool to hear your perspective on it, just because it's like, well, that makes a lot of sense as to why you would do things. And, I grew up in a church home or church family, that I can definitely relate to some of that. The tension that you're saying, I definitely can grasp that. It's not a fun feeling at times, so it's like, I can't imagine. It's crazy to hear you have said that you put it away and then you wound up putting out this prolific catalog. It's pretty insane. I don't mean that wrong and disrespectfully. It's just shocking to me in a good way.
Yeah, I mean, it is surprising of all the art that I've created, and that's really kind of me in the act of quitting. But kind of to answer your question, so what did I do back then? So I started trying to play guitar, and I would like sing along to music and stuff like that. But I started that night of the kind of so-called religious experience. I wrote 9 poems that night, and I ended up writing 1,000 poems over the next 4 years.
Wow.
A lot of them were like songs without music because I couldn't play an instrument. So I had like the melody and everything in my head. A lot of it was kind of like free verse, prose poetry kind of stuff.
Sure.
And then there's a lot of like really bad kind of obvious rhyme kind of stuff, But so that's what I did from like 86 to 90. I wrote a lot of poems. I mean, when I was in high school, my senior year, we did have a band. We played 2 shows, covers.
That's awesome.
And it was funny because like the other guys in the band were into like hair metal, and then I was into like U2 and REM and type of band. So we played like U2, REM, and Poison.
It's amazing.
Yeah. So if you can imagine, I Will Follow and Talk Dirty to Me in the same set. That actually happens. So.
That's incredible.
So then, it was kind of like the summer of '89. I started actually going to clubs in St. Louis and discovered this band called The Eyes. They later were called Pale Divine when they got signed to Atlantic. The guitarist Richard Fortus, he plays in Guns N' Roses now.
Wow.
So, I mean, it's kind of like a Jeff Schroeder kind of story. Like there's sort of this backstory, and then they're like in these huge bands, and the people, kind of can't really connect the dots and stuff like that. But I got to know them immediately because I was underage, so they had to get me in all the shows. And I met some bands and stuff like that, but I went and saw them every single week, like 2, 3, 4 times a week, whenever they play. They at least play 2 nights a weekend. Yeah. And that's really where I kind of like learned how to be a band, how to kind of try to get signed. That was back when there was an industry, and that was the golden, kind of ring was the brass ring to make it, to get a record. Sure. And I just saw their kind of ups and downs of this or that. So I got to know the whole band pretty well. Definitely the singer, Michael Scherer, was kind of my first kind of big kind of mentor musically and stuff like that. He sold me his guitar, so it was like my first real guitar. But I showed him like my poetry and stuff. He's like, well, let me hear it. I'm like, well, how? He's like, well, just record it. I'm like, well, how do you have a tape recorder? I'm like, yeah. I had this little handheld recorder. And then I started recording the songs. And he used to sing with this like British accent because they were doing all this kind of Bauhaus, Echo and the Bunnymen, UK, all that kind of stuff. And so even though he was from Kirkwood, Missouri, he's singing, with British accent. So I'm like, all right, I'll do that. Plus it kind of covers a multitude of sins. Like I couldn't sing. I had, had like a 3-note capability. And so if you just kind of monotone in a British accent, that kind of sounded like something. But kind of how I am, I just like go all into everything full on. And so from 1990 to 92, I recorded and released 500 songs.
Holy crap!
I was record on like a boombox or tape recorder. I had acoustic guitar and a little Casio keyboard. Sometimes I'd play like acoustic and sing, and I'd be playing keyboard with my foot. And then I discovered like the double cassette thing, so I would overdubs. Yeah. Do the dual cassette. I mean, you'd lose the quality. But so I would do double albums with like liner notes and everything. And so I get
amazing.
And they get passed around clubs and different colleges and stuff. And so that's what I did for those 2 years. And I was just every night in a club, underage. And then I started playing in those clubs. So I met this other friend, Brian Crum. He's in the Great Crusades now. He has a solo album just came out. But his band back then was called the Suede Chain. And he was originally from Collinsville, Illinois. He went to the same high school as Michael Stipe, had the same English teacher.
Wow.
And he actually got to read some of Michael Stipe's poetry when he was in high school. And then they went up to University of Missouri, Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, and that's where they met and formed that band. And they were amazing. They were way ahead of their time. They did like pop, like these literally like plays in the middle of bars and
wow.
Anyway, they were like true artists and stuff like that. They were just kind of just ahead of their time. They were great. And so Brian, he would invite me, and I started playing shows like at Kennedy's on the Landing. If you listen to even some of the early Wilco stuff, because they were over in Belleville, and then they came over the river and played primarily at Cicero's, the original Cicero's in U City.
Yeah.
But all the action was kind of happening at the Landing. Mississippi Nights and Kennedy's and stuff like that.
I've been to Mississippi Nights.
Yeah, so that's where I was just hanging out all the time and got to know a lot of people. And I remember hanging out with Jeff Tweedy while he's playing pinball. Uncle Tupelo, and it was just a great scene. I mean, it was very much like if you see the movie Singles and the whole Seattle scene.
Yeah.
And that was what St. Louis was like back then.
Crazy.
Exactly like that.
That's nuts.
Basically, it was like hair metal bands, and then grunge happened. Or like the DC punk scene, if you see the Salad Days. That's what St. Louis was like in the 80s, the late 80s, early 90s. Yeah.
Well, let's talk about your first band, My Little Dog China. Not your first, but your first, I guess, real band per se. Tell me how that kind of came to, and how the name kind of came about, and and then how Alarma kind of came into the picture.
Yeah. Well, that's exactly where we were on the timeline. It was 1992, and kind of broke free from, the independent fundamentalist Baptists. Because I actually did go to college to be a preacher and things like that, and that's where I had my first crisis of faith. And so I later was invited to a non-denom charismatic church, and that's where I was at church one time, and I saw this young kid playing drums for the worship team. And I said, oh, he's going to be the drummer in my band. I just went up and said, hey, you're going to be the drummer in my band.
That's awesome.
And it was great because his parents were actually one of the pastors of the church. And so we had access to the church and all the instruments and the sound system and everything. So we'd be there late at night with music that you could hear for 3 miles because it would just echo through the parking lot. And that's where we just started writing songs. His sister would come over and kind of bang on the keyboards a little bit. And so we just wrote songs. I actually have a lot of recordings sessions.
Oh, wow.
Because we could record them up in the sound booth. And then a friend of a friend invited a guy to play bass. And that was My Little Dog China. Where basically it was Jason and Stacy, which they were PKs. Their parents were the pastors. And then Mike was a friend of a friend. He was really into, Minor Threat, Fugazi, and he kind of had that kind of hardcore kind of punk ethic, and stuff like that. Yeah. So, yeah, we wrote a lot of songs, as you can imagine. I wrote a lot of songs together. Stacy kind of fell out of the band around that time, and so we were trying to get a gig because Kennedy's was kind of like the place to play. Yeah. And so I went there with our little cassette tape from the church. I'm like, hey, we want to get a show. Here's our demo. And they're like, you really need to go in the studio and do something. So I'm like, oh, okay. So we kind of pulled together $150. And my friend Brian, from the Suede Chain, said, I know this guy over in Collinsville. And so we went over there. He had, I don't remember if it was 8 or 16 track or something. and then that's what we did, 5 songs, and that became Eggshells.
Oh wow!
So we did, and then kind of met this guy, Brad Cavanis, who kind of came under, like Brian Quincy Newcomb, God rest his soul, and that whole kind of underground Christian scene. I never even heard of Christian music, so I didn't know anything about it, and so it was kind of new to me, which is probably something to revisit, and it's kind of how I, kind of discovered Mike Knott and things like that.
Sure.
So I remember he was like trying to tell me about this like separate music scene or industry. And they're like, hey, there's a whole thing and you could be a rock star there. I'm like, okay, I'll do that. So he gave me a bunch of addresses to send the cassette tapes to. And then I gave him, and then I'd gone to Cornerstone, I guess, 1991, the backup. So I did encounter Christian music for the first time, like the Choir and Michael Knott and LSU, and met Bill Maloney and Bill Campbell for the Throws. Met Karen and Linford for Over the Rhine, and became friends, some kind of friends, some level with all of them. So that was my first kind of introduction to Christian music. In fact, no, I'm sorry, that was 92, so we had, we formed the bands. I went to Cornerstone in 92. And then we recorded really that EP just to get a gig at Kennedy's. But I sent it out to a bunch of, John Thompson at True Tunes, places like that. Yeah, so I got my years confused. So I went to Cornerstone in 92. We recorded Eggshells 93, and I sent it out. I don't know, maybe I got the years mixed up. I'm too old. So we show up at Cornerstone in 93, and then I pick up the first newspaper, the True Tunes, and we see a review of Eggshells, and we're like, oh,
wow.
At that time, it seemed like a really big deal. And that's where we actually played our very first show, was on the Impromptu stage. And then everything kind of happened from there. Well, and then, I was, so our first show was Cornerstone, and 93, and then once we played our show, it was like we walked everywhere, and then we just kept hearing our songs. People were playing like a cassette everywhere.
That's nuts.
And it was just really exhilarating, like last day, because we finally got onto the Impromptu stage, which was kind of a strange story. And then we're at, I think, the Mortal show. And then we hear, because people were kind of promoting the show, like Over the Rhine, this or that, but we, anyway, we finally got onto the Impromptu stage. We're at the Mortal show, which was packed. And then in between the song, they're like, hey, if My Little Dog China is in the audience, the LSU booth wants to talk to you.
Whoa.
So then we're like, okay. So we just run there, and they're like, hey, we're on tour, and we're going to be playing Kennedy's in St. Louis, and we want you to open up for us. So that was our second show we ever played, was opening up for LSU at Kennedy's.
That is nuts.
It's so funny because, remember, that's why we recorded Eggshells in the first place, was trying to get a gig at Kennedy's.
That's crazy.
The gig. And then from there, that's how we kind of got into the Christian music industry, just through all the zines and magazines. And almost, it got for a while there, like every single issue of every Christian music magazine, we'd have some kind of little blurb or something like that, or feature.
Yeah.
And all the radio stations around the world were playing Eggshells and stuff like that.
That's crazy.
So it kind of sort of just took off like that. I mean, and then we started playing some shows. We had this big show. There wasn't very few places to play. I don't know if you remember, but New Earth Coffee House in Kansas City was the place. Yeah. And so we played our fourth show we ever played there. And honestly, it was a coincidence. So don't take anything from it, whoever's listening. But honestly, we play we show up, and it sells out, and there's like hundreds of people like outside that can't even get in.
Wow.
The show they ever had in the history of the venue until Sixpence None the Richer played years later when they had their big hit song. So at that point, we were obviously the pastor Sheldon's favorite band, and it's total fluke. I mean, no one knew who we were, so there's no way that we sold out the place, but he thought it was, so that became kind of like a big place to play for us in the kind of Christian music and stuff. But it was an epic show.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Let me ask you, where did the name come from? And then let's and you, since Alarma kind of came into it, you mentioned kind of dealing with Christian bands and stuff. Was there any other labels interested as well?
Yeah. So the name, it's when Stacy was still in the band. We're just sitting, at the church at a rehearsal. Like, well, we got to come up with a name. We're just like, yeah, I know. It's just so difficult to come up with a band name. She was like, I know. It's just like My Little Dog China. It was like, I'm like, that's it. She's like, no, it was just so difficult. I'm like, no, that's it. She's
that's
like,
incredible.
No, I couldn't come up with a name. I'm like, no, that's it. She's like, what are you talking about? I'm like, My Little Dog China. And that was
nuts.
That's all it was. I know it's funny because it's, we became like a really heavy band. And I think it was just like a 90s thing or something. But everyone always loved that band name. I don't think it was that great at all. And every time people would ask, like, what the name of your band was, it was always the same conversation. Oh, what's the name of your band? Oh, My Little Dog China. What? My Little Dog China. My Little Dog, My Little. That's not a good name. You have to, like, say it 7 times.
It sticks out, though. I'll give it that.
It did, and everyone loved it, even in the general market, because that's really where we spent most of our time playing.
Yeah.
For secular clubs and stuff like that. And there's something about the name, and maybe even the contrast of kind of a corny, funny, childlike little name.
Yeah.
And this really intense, heavy band,
totally
dressing and things like that. Maybe it was a good juxtaposition. Yeah, actually, we had a lot of hype in the Christian scene, but we were removed because at that time, almost all of it was in California.
Yeah.
It was just before the kind of shift to Nashville. And then obviously Brandon, then going to Seattle for Tooth and Nail. So it was all based in California. And so being in Missouri, like we were just totally removed from kind of everything.
Yeah.
And living in our own little world. And I mean, at that time, pretty much every label was interested in signing us.
Wow.
Any label that, at that level, that signed alternative music and stuff like that. But at the time, I was married and had a stepson and kind of had, financial responsibilities. I was, pretty much just delivering pizza and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I kind of landed this job working at a high school with special ed, special needs students and things like that. And so I only had limited time off. And so I really had my Christmas break, and then I could use like vacation days.
Yeah.
And so I really just took, I don't know. I basically just any label I was willing to record at that time, I just signed with them. And that happened to be Alarma from Frontline. But a couple of funny stories is that, it's a long time ago, so it's been a while. I remember getting this phone call from Steve Hindalong.
Wow.
And I didn't even answer it, so I just let it kind of go to the cassette, those tiny cassette answering machine type of thing. And he goes, hey, we just heard your demo or whatever, and we want to produce your album. So if you get a record deal, we want you to consider us, which, he was working with Chris Colbert.
Yeah.
Time, and obviously Derry. And they were kind of a production team. And I remember that, and that was, which was kind of funny because the year prior, my best friend at the time went up to Chris and Steve and some other guys going, hey, my friend's band just started called My Little Dog China, like keep an eye out for them or something like that. And then fast forward a year later, they're calling me up if we could produce my album. So we had producers before we had a record deal. And so anyway, we signed with Alarma, the Frontline, and then we actually went to Nashville. It's the winter of 93, 94 for time's sake. And we recorded the first half at Steve Griffith of Vector.
Uh-huh.
He had just moved there to this house in Brentwood because all these people were like living in the hood in Southern California, and then they like cashed out and they could buy a mansion, or,
in Nashville.
Like in Nashville, because the cost of living. So we like just drove out like in the suburbs of Brentwood in this big house, and the studio wasn't even finished. It was just like in a basement. There was like a control room, but there was no window. It was just a wall, and then another live room.
Crazy.
And it was gear, and that's where we recorded half of it, and then the other half was at the salt mine, where we did the overdubs and the mixing and stuff. But at that time was kind of, there's a history there. That's where I think Amy Grant recorded some of her albums back in the day.
Awesome.
And that's how that happened. But it was a funny story with Tooth and Nail. And this is, if anybody's, if Brandon's listening, this is the story he told me. So whether he's telling me the truth or not. So at the Cornerstone 94 is when the Velvet's Carnival came out. And Brandon came up to me and goes, "Man, why did you sign with Frontline?" And I'm like, because they were willing to record over Christmas break, He's like, "Dude, I was totally going to like sign you. You were going to be the first Tooth and Nail artist. I was going to build
what?"
Because he was working at Frontline and kind of learning how to run a record company, and that's when him and Mike Knott started Tooth and Nail. And there's kind of different stories of that, but I think that's true to some extent. Mike Knott helped Brandon start Tooth and Nail, and Brandon was at Frontline, and so the Eggshells demo was going around everyone's office, and so he saw that, which he assumed like no one heard of this band. There's the doggy. And which is ironic, we're talking about my bulldog China. Is he just was like, "Oh, okay, I've got this band, I'm going to take this demo and start Tooth and Nail with this band." And that's what he told me.
Unbelievable.
And but that didn't happen. So
it's crazy. Crazy. You mentioned the Velvet's Carnival. Let's talk about that record. Awesome record. First time I ever heard you guys. I loved it, like down to the artwork, everything about it. I really loved the fuzziness of it. I liked the, at that time, alternative rock obviously was king. So it definitely fit into that time frame. And, I just remember vividly getting it because of the artwork. Good. Okay, yeah. That's fine. I can edit.
Yeah. Can we hit pause and then?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Do you mind? Okay.
No, not at all.
I'll be very short. Otherwise, she's just going to start.
Hey, this is Aaron Sprinkle, and you're listening to the Rumors Are True podcast.
The Velvet's Carnival, awesome record when I first discovered you guys back in the day. Just curious your thoughts on it overall, looking back on it, and maybe kind of what it felt like hearing that for the first time and kind of your thoughts on it.
Yeah. Well, I think musically what was interesting was, I'm just finishing up your interview with Chris Colbert, and he talked about one of his favorite things was kind of the first record for different artists, and he could kind of put his fingerprints all over it, and that's very much what happened. We came in as basically a three-piece band, and they kind of had a vision for it, and they kind of pulled me aside and just said, "Hey, we just really want to see if we can get on the same page of just not doing like a conservative kind of like heavy rock album, but just really, kind of just pushing the boundaries and stuff like that." And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm all in, whatever you guys want to do." And so, I think for better and for worse, that's what happened is, I love the album and what happened. First time being in a real studio, first time just doing everything, and just having the ability to keep doing track after track after track. And once I got into it, it's just like I just had idea after idea after idea,
Yeah.
And being able to, vocally and kind of explore different things. And some of the songs didn't have lyrics when I got in there, so I wrote
Wow.
a lot of lyrics on the spot right there, which is part of the story too. And so if you listen to kind of that album, especially people who are in kind of alternative Christian music, I mean, they definitely can hear like the guitar tones and, reverby drums and all that kind of stuff. I mean, Chris would do stuff like put mics in buckets or up in a, chimney, have a guitar set with chords and tremolo, and then the drums would trigger the guitars and stuff like that. So it has a very, I would say, very Chris Gilbert sound. Obviously,
Yeah.
Steve, was the producer, and you can hear the kind of signature percussion from Steve. But they had multiple people, like Derry Doherty, mixed half of it. Chris engineered it all, but he mixed half. This guy Dave Hackbarth was a part of it, and so it was definitely a team effort. It's not a criticism at all, but just sort of the other side of the kind of just the sound of it was that's not what the band sounded like.
Mm.
And so it kind of put us in a weird situation because, like, well, how are we going to do that live? But me, it's like, well, let's just write all new songs. So that's what we did. We didn't play those songs very much.
Really?
When we toured and things like that. Some became, sort of standards, like the song "The Entanglement" or "Entanglement," the web became like a standard because we always do these freeform improv ongoing bridges that would last 10, 20 minutes.
Wow.
Make stuff up as we went along, and that became like our big highlight of the show. That was really the only song that lasted from the album that we played live. So we just wrote all new songs and kind of found our sound from there. On a personal level, I mean, it's 2024, and it's like, I'm not good at math, but I think it's 30 years ago. I don't know. I mean, this is kind of where we started, so not to make it too heavy, but it's like, that was a turning point in my life. And recording that album was very traumatic.
Mm.
And, there's a lot, most things I can't say, but it's like,
Sure.
Things that I think are relevant to probably your audience. It's like, in a lot of the guests, that you're having on, there's a very dark side to the Christian music industry. I think you could even say that's where people's, faith in Christ go to die.
Yeah, it's true.
And I was one of those people of just encountering just, the level of hypocrisy and corruption. And definitely, at the time being, didn't realize it, but I was a pretty innocent guy, and it really traumatized me. Wow. And so there's a lot of kind of, I guess, Easter eggs, you could say, or on that album. Even a lyric, there's secrets I can't tell. The last two songs, Nothing and Squirrel, I wrote there on the spot, and then some other lyrics, which was about the experiences I was having. The A&R came into the studio for a couple of days, literally like for hours upon hours, just corner me and sit there like 2 inches from me and just talk to my face how I needed to say all this about Jesus and put in the liner notes, and we had to write out our testimonies, and even vocal booth, and wanted to change like some of the songs, and it was just a really awkward, uncomfortable experience. And so, just a lot of things I learned. And that's, and that's very much what became kind of the artwork, at least the original artwork. Big statement. I mean, I had this idea. It was kind of almost like a Zoo TV sort of perspective of kind of calling out kind of at that time, like the media and stuff like that. Yeah. But it became specifically eventually about the Christian music industry. That's a complete lie. And the idea of like selling Jesus and selling an image of you being a Christian is a marketing tool. I refuse to do that.
Yeah.
We didn't put anything like that in the artwork and stuff like that. And we sent in the artwork and actually got rejected. And then they did this artwork, and it was literally, I even was at the movie theater watching Reality Bites. I remember that scene. Remember when the Ben Stiller character takes Winona Ryder's character's footage and then creates this terrible, cheesy TV show? That's literally what happened. I came home from seeing that movie. There was a package in my mailbox, and it was the proposed artwork for the Velvet Carnival from the label, and it was horrendous. And so I freaked out, called label, well, we got to go to print in like a couple of days. So I just hand wrote all that artwork and sent it overnight. But I had kind of the big statement. I kind of generalized it and kind of said the music industry, or I can't remember, media, but it was, eventually specifically aimed at the Christian music industry. It's just traumatic. And then what was going on in my life after that, from when the album was recorded over that winter and then was released in July, my whole life kind of fell apart, and found out my wife was living a double life on my back, and I could see my stepson that I raised for 5 years ever again. And in between that, she had like the bass player kicked out of the band. I mean, there was a lot of drama around that time. And so by the time like the album comes out in July and we play Cornerstone, I mean, that's where I was at that time. I just kind of, my whole world was just turned upside down, and I was just, I don't know, I didn't realize at the time, but I was in a totally traumatic state.
Yeah, sounds like it.
Really redefined just almost everything for me, and it kind of expanded or kind of lifted that kind of tension with music and art and faith and ministry to a whole new level of like total like trauma, and that's kind of what kind of shaped a lot of my life and my music and art ever since.
Well, that's really heavy. Thank you for sharing that. I know that's not an easy thing to do, so I want to say thank you in that aspect. So the record comes out. It sounds like you didn't play much of it. Does the band kind of dissolve after that? Is that kind of what comes next?
No, we played a lot of shows. We did play some Christian shows and stuff like that. But we really, so that'd been 94, had a mixture of, secular Christian shows. I kind of went off and started a Christian community for a little while. It fell apart and then came back. And anyway, it was really, 95 is where kind of things really took off. We went solely general market in the music scene, especially St. Louis, a little bit of Kansas City, which has a great indie rock. Yeah. Shiner, Molly McGuire, and all those.
Shiner's great, yeah.
Yeah. So, and the Hurricane was like the club, and and we had a great manager, and we just had all the best like spots, which we learned was the best way is not to headline, it's to open for the opener. I mean, not the headliner. And so it's like after the openers, like when everyone's there, you have maximum peak of the audience, and that's where we kind of built our audience. Was there, and then I really think that's where we found our sound, and I think that's where we got good. And then we actually played Cornerstone 95 is one of my favorite shows ever. I went there actually to play solo because I kind of left Alarma because they were like, hey, we want to do another album. I said, well, this is as Christian as we'll ever get. And so they said, all right, well, we're done then. And so we're kind of in between. And so there's a possibility, I don't know if you remember Michael Black back in the day. And he had started this label, I think it was with Matt Wignall or something called Reverend G. And so there's a possibility we're going to do that. And anyway, I went there to play like a solo show, and Stacy came along with me, and we brought our gear. And then by chance, there was this new magazine called Seven Ball Magazine.
Yeah, I remember that.
And anyway, Michael Black ended up trying to get me a place to play. Just went from stage to stage to stage, and they eventually gave Frank Chimento enough money for us to play. And so I literally just ran to the payphone and found my drummer and my bass player. I was like, just get in the car, don't even get your gear. We're playing. And they drove up, and we, at the very last minute, just found gear right before we had to go on and play one of our best shows ever.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and there's a really bad bootleg of it, but it captures the moment. And Chris Colbert did the sound, and it was amazing.
That's so cool.
Yeah, and so after that, Shortly after that is when, the breakup happened. Too much to get into, but
Sure.
but it's like the other breakup of a band. I don't know. It was just me trying to kind of find myself still. I was back in ministry, and that's the thing. I was always kind of in and out of ministry and
Yeah.
music and art. And I don't know. I just didn't like where the band was going, was trying to kind of get us back on course. A lot of, experiences. You don't know if it's God or the devil. And
Yeah.
I essentially just kind of like broke up the band or whatever.
Wow.
And then, I don't know if when Chris was talking to you, anyway, they started a band called Pave the Rocket. That's what album is.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
I got you.
And so then I kind of was like quitting music again, because like I told you, that's all I've done. I quit music, and then I ended up writing 75 songs that next month. And that's when I found Catholicism, and I started writing the shoegaze mass called My Lonely Shrine.
That's so sick.
And I mean, not that I even knew what I was doing on the mass part, but or that you shouldn't do that, but I did. And so I was just, writing like 100 songs a month or something and doing demos and stuff. And then I was back pastoring at a church, and then they kicked me out for being satanic because they were charismatic and they knew that. That's a joke. So then I was like, well, now what? So I remember calling up Michael Black, and I said, hey, you want to do a record? He's like, yeah, let's do a record. And I'm like, okay. So I just hung up. So he goes, oh, I got this idea. Okay, you're going to go solo. You're the ex guy from My Little Duck China. And then we're going to get every cool Christian music producer, and they're going to produce one song.
Wow.
So that was going to be the project. Now I remember all those people, but it'd be maybe like Steve Hindalong and Mike Knott and Steve Taylor and Terry Taylor and whoever else. And it was just like, maybe even get people like Charlie Peacock or something like that. Everyone gets a song, and then, which is a cool concept.
That is a great concept.
So I recorded, because I still was recording on Boombox, and so I sent my cassette tape with the songs I was working on. And so he's hanging out with Mike Knott. And so this is, 95, 96. So Mike was doing the Aunt Betty's, and, at the last minute left Island and went to Elektra. And that's when he got his, $1 million for publishing and, all the money for the album and stuff, and did the album, and they were just waiting for it to come out. And so he hears my cassette tape, in classic Mike. He's like, well, I want the whole fucking album. And he's like, I'm going to produce the whole album, and I'm going to get him signed to Island. And so that's what the whole plan was Frontline, Alarma was going to pay for the album and record it, and they were going to release it. And there was good numbers on like what it was going to ship. But the whole plan was for me to go to Island Records. And so I went out to the green room, and I was just listening to your Ted Cookerly. He was totally right. There was something happening around 96 at the green room. Like as he said, it was like they were just dialed in. Everything that came out of that studio was just incredible. It just had his energy.
Yeah.
And Watch Me Fall was like a part of that. And showed up, and I was there for a couple of months, spent every day with Mike, and it was a special time. And we did Watch Me Fall. And yeah, it was just kind of those classic rock and roll stories. It was just like, you'll never have to worry about money the rest of your life. You're going to move to LA. Mike's going to manage you. You're going to tour with the Aunt Betty's. You're going to be signed to Island.
Wow.
And like, okay, I guess that's what's going to happen. And but what happened was Frontline was going under, and they were in what's called receivership, where someone's kind of managing the business, but no one owns it. And so in that time frame, the Aunt Betty's album finally comes out. They release Jesus, and he's like, all right, let's do the next single. And like, well, we're done.
Oh.
And so Mike's like, well, then I'm done. And so he got them to give him more money and leave. And so I remember getting the phone call, and he's like, hey, told me what happened. He goes, well, I got to go for that island deal for myself, because I got to take care of my family, whatever. I'm like, okay. And that was it. It was over. They did a showcase. It didn't go so well. They didn't get the deal either. And kind of the rest is history.
Wow.
So I was but the album just kind of sat there for quite a long time. And by the time it kind of fizzled out and eventually got released, it was kind of underground. It didn't do obviously as well as it would have done. But I mean, it still was ranked pretty high the following year in 7 Ball and stuff like that.
Yeah, I thought it was a great record.
No, I'm very proud of that. To me, it's sort of like my sort of Joshua Tree or something. But yeah, and it's especially fans of Mike Nott. I mean, it's almost like a Mike Nott album. I mean, Brian Deutsch played bass. He played some guitar. Ed Benrock, who was the original drummer for Aunt Betty's, played drums because he went on tour with another band, and that's when so Chuck Cummings took over, and that's when they got the record deal. Is when
Crazy.
Ed toured, so he kind of missed out on that. So and then Mike sang on the album, and I played his acoustic guitar and stuff like that, and and he at that time was sort of like my mentor, and that's a little bit of what kind of shaped me of. Kind of, I guess, the persona or image I kind of created was based upon Mike's guidance. He was just like, you have to be a crazy motherfucker and get your money and get out. And I'm like, all right, that's the plan. Be a crazy motherfucker. And so just create an image and a persona, live out your psychotic kind of demons, as an artist. And that's what the people want. And, that's kind of sort of the path I took.
Let me ask you, I know he obviously just passed recently, kind of your thoughts maybe on his impact on your life. It sounds like he was very influential in a lot of who you've become as an artist. So just curious, how that affected you the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, it hit me a lot harder than I thought. We had a lot of time together during recording of Watch Me Fall. We went to a lot of his shows. He was doing some solo acoustic Aunt Betty shows. Been every day together. Obviously, to work with Mike. I mean, you drank all the time. That's what you did. You just drank and smoked and talked, and every now and then you actually made some music. And you just kind of share life together and talk and stuff like that. And then from there, we played a few shows together. In 03, 03 is the last time I saw him. We played a show in Santa Monica when I was living out there. And fortunately, I've got a couple photos of that.
That's cool. And
I've posted, and we played, a couple shows, in between that. But that's the last time I ever saw him. And so it had been like 20 years, And then his death really impacted me. I could see everyone kind of like listening to the music, and honestly, the first day or so, it was too much. I couldn't listen to his music.
Wow.
I don't know. I'll share this because when I've talked it through some people, and maybe it'll be helpful to some people. Everyone I think knows Mike's struggle he had, and within the faith that he had. Which was kind of the classic Mike version of it. A lot of mixture of a lot of crazy thoughts and a lot of really simple, beautiful thoughts.
Yeah.
He kept his faith in Christ. And unfortunately, never conquered, kind of his personal demons and his struggle, with alcohol. Mm-hmm. And I don't know. What devastated me in the way that I kind of articulated it was, and I'm really trying to kind of take it to heart and to learn from it and to look at my life. I mean, that's kind of what death does. It makes you re-examine how you're living your life. And out of love for him, I found myself even saying, I mean, I did eventually start listening to music again, taking it in. It was just, kind of realized how much of a personal kind of connection there was between us. There's more than just like similarities of music and stuff like that. But I remember even just saying spontaneously, like, I hate you. Not that but it's out of love. Like, I hate that you did that to yourself and that you did that to us, not as a judgment, but just like we loved you.
Mm.
And you're not here anymore. And even when you were here, you weren't as present because of that. And it's not a judgment, so I don't want anyone to take that the wrong way. But just how much the love was there. And the thing is, we all have our struggles.
Yeah.
And I definitely have got mine. And I hate how I've responded to life too. I hate the years that I've wasted. I hate that, I listened to too many negative voices of condemnation, even like suicide and things like that. When there were people in my life that loved me, there were people who could support my kind of devout traditional faith.
Yeah.
But the fact that I make art that's really provocative and seems to be a contradiction to my faith. It's just the art I make. It's the art that's influenced me. I've made Christian art and things like that, but most of the stuff that comes out is not. And I've really suffered a lot over that, just internally and from other people. But I overlooked the fact that there were people who loved me and supported me all along. And I don't know if that makes sense. So that's kind of the connection.
I get that.
Is that I wish Mike, that could have been enough. The people who loved him and really tried to help him and supported him, I wish that would have been enough to where he could have been happy and healthy and really even produced even more music and more art. He was a great, painter, and he was just a personality, and that's what Mike was. Kind of like Ted kind of said it well. It was just like he was just the quintessential like rock star celebrity guy. Like when he entered the room, everything changed. But he could have been a greater gift. And so I kind of look at myself and just, not saying I'm anything special. We're all equal in this. We all can be special. We all can be that person that walks into the room and changes things. But unfortunately, we let just the negative things in our life get in the way, and we get off course and we become someone we're not.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what I've learned from that. And that's what I want to do from here on out, is really try to be present to the present, not take things for granted, but do the best I can to use the gifts that God gave me.
That's awesome. I love that. Thank you for sharing that. That I know his death obviously affected a lot of people, and especially people who knew him deep down. So I know that's, been a struggle for a lot of people lately, and I just appreciate you being vulnerable about that. Let's talk about, so you left Alarma, and then you put out the Nash Vegas record. I guess just talk me through the next couple years of records that you've put out. I know there's an extensive amount, including another My Little Dog China record, Game Face. So kind of talk me through those individually, if you don't mind, and we don't have to stay on them long. Yeah. But yeah, let's just go through Nash Vegas on and up to Class of 98, essentially.
Yeah. So Watch Me Fall's 96. I toured full time for 2 years after that. I did a lot of solo acoustic. My standard was I played 3.5 hours a night for $30 or 10.
Holy crap.
My longest show was 5.5 hours. Then the Christian gigs, I get $150 to play for 45 minutes, and that seemed like a lot of money. I mean, I was literally living on people's sofas in my car and eating like a cookie a day and stuff like that, sipping on coffee. So I did that for 2 years, and that's what so after Watch Me Fall, I got into producing, and that's when I started managing and developing artists and producing albums. And then I created different companies like Fashion Pop or whatever, and just kind of a moniker, and just kind of, taking all the experiences I had working with Steve Hindalong and Chris and Mike and all that, and just applying it to my life. And I was just kind of surviving. I really didn't know what to do with my life. And so I just did music kind of out of that. I mean, I was in and out of ministry and things like that. So that led me to Nashville in 1997. I produced an album and I moved there, and that became a big part of my life. I started this ministry that I did with home groups and this or that. I spent about a year and a half doing nothing but praise and worship music.
Oh, wow.
So I wrote hundreds of songs there. I was spending a lot of time with EMI when they were creating the EMI worship and stuff like that. I don't know if you know the band Sonic Flood.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the first show they ever played was my event in Nashville in Franklin.
Oh, wow.
And so I did a lot of that kind of stuff. I hosted a lot of music nights and deeply in the Nashville scene. And I don't know, I just had this epiphany one day. I don't know if it was a good one, but because I wrote all, hundreds and hundreds of songs was playing all the time, but I didn't record them. And so I was like, oh, I should record them. And that's what became Nash Vegas. I had limited time and money, whatever. So it ended up being a double album, 9 songs rock, and I think, I don't know how many, 10, 12 acoustic. And so that I put that out myself under my kind of fashion pop thing. And then I had a friend, this church in Nashville called the Anchor.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of that.
Yeah, so I helped kind of form that church. And I was kind of, pastoring and doing praise and worship and, part of that team for a while. And so Josh Stump, who was the original pastor, he created this label called Reborn Records. And so I had this really terrible joke that I'd released the same album twice. I don't know why I thought that was funny. And I released it on April Fool's Day. So I basically released Nash Vegas twice on his label. It's called Jesus. Instead of Nash Vegas, City of God, it was Jesusville, USA. Or Nash Vegas, the land of milk and money. And I released another album called Jesusville, USA, the City of God. And it was the same songs. Well, a lot of the same songs. And I just changed the titles to like really bad, cheesy Christian titles.
That's hysterical.
But then I threw on like 11 bonus tracks of live stuff. And actually I did a cover of Rock Stars on Age.
Okay.
And Pretty Vacant from the Sex Pistols is on there. So that came out, what was that, 2000? And, I had the classic album release show where the CDs didn't make it in time. So,
oh God,
every band, isn't it? It's like, gosh, that was terrible. But it was fine. I had this character called the Rock and Roll Messiah, and so I dressed up in a gown and a cowboy hat. And anyway, so there's that, Nash Vegas, and then, the Kind of Strange Game Face album in 2001. So, through an exchange, my company, Fashion Pop, ended up being owned by someone else. And, another thing that wasn't even mentioned with Ted is we actually did an EDL album.
Really?
Yeah. It was a self-titled album that I produced, and I wrote over half the songs and played guitar on it. It was a really kind of bad time for everybody, like rock and roll stories, But there is another EDL album that's out there. And we did it actually at the Salt Mine. And so we did an album, but the distribution company wanted a name that they could kind of have a story. So they wanted My Little Dog China. I didn't want to do it, but it was just kind of like, well, that's the only way the album's going to get done if I don't do it.
Yeah.
And so I did this album, and it didn't sound like My Little Dog China. And like I told you this morning, it's like we did this really funny promo video. At that time, Johnny Knoxville, Jackass, it was on MTV and stuff like that. So we did kind of a Jackass, where I football by myself and stuff. But not really much came from that. I think that was hopefully I'm not talking too much, but it's like that was another turning point, I would say. I wasn't as happy with where my music was going. I mean, there's always a lot of compromises when you work with a label or whatever, whoever you're working with, you're kind of stuck, what are the good and bad compromises? And so it's just life. But I just felt like I lost something. And so I wanted to go back to the beginning. And so the beginning for me was recording on boombox. And so I was like, well, I'm going to go back. And I literally went back because I had some cassettes from some of those songs and stuff and relearned them. And so I had this new friend, Steve Wilson, that I met and started working with around 2001. And he was an artist, but he also had like a little hard disk studio. So, because I always had different people I worked with, and I have like an engineer. I had Scott McCaskey for a while, who was a disciple of Chris Colbert, and whatever. I kind of go from engineer to engineer, as a producer. And so I found a new guy. So, hey, I got some songs I want to record. And I'm like, okay. And so then it kept going from like an album to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5. And so I recorded a 6-disc album. And so we made the studio, a studio at like 10 a.m. And so in between, like when I got up there, I would like learn or discover like 10 songs, and I just show up. And that's why I don't know. I did like a 6-disc album of me. I played everything. Played bass, keyboard, ink pen, and I just wanted to capture that live, like me in a bedroom, basically. And then I ended up releasing that. It's like 72 songs or something like that.
Unbelievable.
And then I had this other regret. I have this blog I'll need to find and re-release. I kind of tell sort of the story of my little dog China. And it's the way I end the blog is, I think kind of says it all. If I could do it all over again, I would make the same wrong decision. You know? I don't know if you caught that.
No, I get it. I
don't know, if that was the right thing or the wrong thing. All of it. Was it the band right? Was it breaking up right or wrong? And so it's kind of this recurring dream. But one thing I had to regret is that, man, we got to a place where we were really good. And every band who stays together long enough knows that place. Because we would have either great shows or terrible shows. But we got to a place where we could kind of just show up and just kind of kill it.
Yeah.
I never got to capture that. And we had all these songs, And so I had these 2 bootlegs of the kind of 2 eras of the post-Elvis Carnival, My Little Dog China. And so I learned the songs. I went in the studio. And, I had a drummer and my friend Troy Deaton, who was in Curious Fools. We did a lot of albums together. We did the Nash Vegas album and a lot of other things. Anyway, we did the My Little Dog China album, User Friendly, that came out in 2001.
Wow.
Yeah, and it sounds exactly like we sounded. So we're really proud of that. And just so I should mention, because we forget, like I rebranded all my music as soundtracks for wasted youth. So
yeah.
Listening, you're like, well, where can I hear the music? All the streaming platforms, look up soundtracks for wasted youth and all the stuff I've released. It should be up there. But like I said, I've got, more music that's unfinished and not released than I've put out. Because, from that time, 2000, that's 2002. Over the next 20 years, I've done just countless stuff. That's
so cool. I'm glad you sent me that link recently because I've been able to delve into it. And, I hate to say this, after your solo record, before the internet was ablaze, it was hard to find that stuff. So I'm glad that's out there at least, for everyone to, be able to hear it. And the Nash Vegas record, by the way, just for the record, I love that record. I mean, not that the other ones I don't, but I've really been listening to that a lot lately. It's a fantastic record. Trying to go through each of them as a whole, since we've connected. So that I'll be obviously listening to the rest of those. But let's talk about your time working with the class of 98 on Militia Group. You mentioned that. I didn't know that. I mean, I knew that band. I know Chad Pearson from Militia Group and just had him on recently. So that was an interesting anecdote I didn't know. Maybe talk me through that. Did that feature your friend Steven? Is that who you mentioned earlier?
Yeah, it's his band. That's his artist name. So I want that to be clear. But yeah, how it came about, he was a friend of a friend. I'll connect the dots later. Let's stick on this. So he's a friend of a friend, and I remember he was in this band in Nashville. It didn't work out, so he went back, finished his music degree, and we're having this great kind of party in Nashville, like good party. Like we just hung out and you just talk about Rilke and listen to Over the Rhine, and everyone kind of plays their own songs. And then he played the song. And remember, I was kind of in that sort of mode of like every artist I want to produce, every artist, I want to manage. So I'm like, oh, here's my new guy. I want to work with this guy. But he was kind of reluctant, but he was recording my music. And so I said, hey, when are you going to let me produce you? And he's like, oh, okay. So he kind of reluctantly did that. And he had this project, he kind of called it Bliss. And so when I was doing Fashion Pop, I rebranded it as Stereo Bliss, and there was kind of some incarnations of the band, whatever. And but then we're like, well, let's do a solo album. And that kind of came about when we were recording my 6-disc. And so we did this EP. And so he had some band name ideas, and I said, oh, the Class of 98, that's cool. And so I kind of branded that. I did all these like letter jacket patches and stuff. And
yeah.
class president. It was really kind of fun because I got into like branding and that type of thing. And so I kind of got more excited about working with other bands than really my own music, and the idea of kind of playing, I guess, Malcolm McLaren or Andy Warhol with everybody, you know?
Yeah.
So that's kind of what it was. We did this EP, the class of 98, and he's the class president, whatever. And then I think it was through like Ryan Rado.
Oh, no, Ryan. Yeah.
He had, I guess, the connection to the Militia Group. But Steve was and is an amazing producer. And so he started doing a lot of Tooth and Nail albums. And so that was kind of the two labels that were kind of interested. It was like Brandon wanted to sign Class 98, and then the Militia Group was interested. So it was kind of that classic, you know, do you go Christian, you go secular kind of thing.
Yeah.
Well, and I'm not sure, I haven't listened to the other episode, but so we're going to record the first EP, which got the deal. And we needed a drummer. And I said, you know, who would you want? If you could have any drummer you want. He's like, well, I'd want Matt Fine he was in the band Celebrity.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
I just had Ryan from Celebrity on. He's coming out this Friday.
Yeah. So he was kind of like the rock drummer in Nashville. And
awesome.
He was amazing. He was a show unto himself. So we got Matt Fine to play drums, you know, but then I think that's when Celebrity got their deal. And so he had a roommate, Colby, so he became like the drummer. And then he got Ben Arms from bass, who eventually went on to play with the Glorious Unseen, stuff like that. And
oh, yeah. I know Ben Chris.
Nick Blumhart, who played with some Christian bands, stuff like that. So that kind of became the band, the Class of 98. But essentially it was me and Steve. You know, we did wrote songs and recorded it. Then the band came in once they got the deal with the Militia Group. And so I produced that with Steve. And then they toured for a while. But there's a lot of great music. After that, there's an album called Heaven, which is the full Class of 98 album. So
okay.
Look it up. I'm really proud of that album. And then there's some other singles. In fact, just did a new single that hadn't been released yet.
Oh, that's cool.
That's my connection. I mean, Steve and I, you know, kind of best friends and work on each other's music and a lot of other artists for over 20 years. We talk all the time. And so that's my connection to Class of 98. I mean, it's Steve's band. Sure. It's kind of like that fifth Beatle type of thing.
Yeah.
And that's what I kind of am into a lot of artists is, I mean, I'm proud of my music and this or that, but a lot of the music that I'm maybe equally or even more proud of is the other bands I work with. And I've been able to kind of be that, you know, Daniel Lanois type of approach where you kind of join, or obviously George Martin and things like that, where it comes from. You just join the band.
Yeah. And
you leave, you know. And so I really enjoy that.
What are some of the other artists that you've done that with that you'd like for people to hear?
Well, a recent thing, that's a connection to Steve and Father Chris from Luxury. Father Justin Matthews, he's an Orthodox priest as well. So he was the one, when I played my first Nashville show in 97, he was in a band with Steve. And they had kind of like this developmental deal. They played a show, and that's who I played with. And so I got to know them, and especially Justin, and we became more friends. And so then when they broke up, he kind of got poached by Troy Deaton and Steve Murray, who were Furious Fools. And they were they had signed with Goatee after that and started a record label called Radio Static.
Okay.
In a studio. And so we all co-produced Justin's first solo album in 97.
Oh, cool.
And then he did music for a while, and then he kind of quit music and became a priest and things like that. He does a lot of nonprofit work. And so a couple of years ago, we spent a lot of time. I went to stay with him a few days in Kansas City, and he wanted to get back into music. And so fast forward, he started writing songs, and then, you know, I co-wrote a 12-song album, and I wrote and recorded like the tracks, and then we went to Nashville last year and did it, and there's 5 songs released. So the name of the project the band is Not Made by Hands.
Oh, yeah.
And so Father Chris from Luxury plays bass on it, and I'm actually really proud of that album, and so that's a current thing. You know, there's other kind of more independent artists. There's a friend of mine, Tim Thompson. He kind of goes by his solo name. now, but he also went by Young Heart Sparks Fire. And so if you look those up, I've done most of his projects. And in fact, I just found an old song that I just finished and a couple of days ago. So we're going to release.
That's awesome.
Yeah, there's tons of stuff out there. Yeah, it could just kind of go on and on. And yeah, so all my music's pretty much been rebranded as soundtracks for Wasted Youth, and then the new Orthodox Outcast thing.
Yeah, I was gonna say, let's talk about that briefly. Kind of maybe describe what that is and what you're doing with that.
Well, Orthodox Outcast really, was kind of just social media kind of brand name for posting Orthodox Christian content. Like quotes and prayers and things like that. It's a lot of the photography and graphics I do that's, focus on Orthodoxy. And it's kind of how I've used social media over the years. I had a company for 15 years called Monk Rock. And then I had like a worldwide lay monastic community. A lot of my focus has been on kind of monasticism and how lay people can kind of live like a monk in the world.
Yeah.
And kind of a mixture, and kind of a combination of kind of Catholics, Protestants, Orthodox, and the kind of monastic tradition. And so over the years, once social media, it kind of became a thing, I've just been doing that ever since, Facebook and definitely Instagram. So, yeah, I just, a few years ago, I don't remember when, just kind of part of my whole life of trauma and stuff like that. It's in one of the Psalms. I've chosen rather to be, an outcast in the house of my Lord than dwell in the tents of sinners. And it kind of just stuck out one time praying. So I chose Orthodox Outcast, and I just post a bunch of stuff, and people like it and follow it. But like I said, I do counseling, which I've done the last, 30 years. And so social media and things like that, I guess you could say it's kind of like my first desire for music and to be Bono. It's just living as an artist, being a Christian. And if you just put stuff out, people are drawn to you. It could be a question, it could be this, or they just kind of want help. And then you build a relationship with them, and that's what I counsel. And so that's what Orthodox Outcast is. There's all the stuff I post. You can go to Instagram and see all things. But a lot of it happens behind the scenes of just people reaching out, and I counsel or build a relationship with them. But then I decided I wanted to try doing some music under that name. And I have, as you know, just tons of unfinished music. But I really got into synth music around 2006 with my Hidden Track album. And since then, I've done rock and other stuff, continued, but I really got into synth. And so it's kind of this combination of my thinking, sort of like my long, actually hip hop kind of influence of, which would be like kind of creating tracks.
Yeah.
But, I have sort of this shoegaze, or what I kind of finally, a friend pointed out, it's really one of my biggest influences is The Cure.
Love The Cure.
And that's just how I think. It's just this long, ongoing, introducing every instrument one by one. I just love long intros and things like that. So I was, whether there be, anyway, I had a lot of unfinished songs, and I just thought, I was building tracks and stuff, and I just thought, well, I'll just do instrumental music. And so I just started releasing music under Orthodox Outcast, just for something different.
That's cool.
Yeah.
That's awesome, man. I love that. I love hearing that. Well, I know you've kind of brought me through your long catalog, which, I want to say first and foremost, everything that you've ever put out, I thoroughly enjoy, and I just appreciate you bearing your soul in that aspect. So I want to make that very clear. I absolutely think you have something that people want to hear. So I definitely want that made known. What does the future look like for you, man? I know you can't predict the future, but I want to know, what does it look like for you?
Well, I think, I'm 53, and I don't know. My life is really just going around the same circle over and over and over. Maybe making the same mistakes, but I know that I learn something each time I go around the circle. Why I'm mentioning trauma is only because I really think this is something that we're learning more about. And the more that we understand trauma and post-trauma, a lot of people are seeing that that's what they have. At some degree, they have, PTSD, or what I have, complex post-traumatic stress disorder and things like that. And that's really kind of shaped the last 5 years of my life of really learning about that and kind of seeing how to live a healthy life and kind of seeing that health and holiness are kind of one and the same. And so, that's sort of like kind of a primary kind of preoccupation, is kind of merging being healthy and being holy as sort of one thing.
Yeah.
And so I would say it's probably the most important thing, you could say, well, the most important thing is Jesus. Like, okay, but what does that mean? Well, to me, this is what it means. It's your whole life and your whole being is a part of that process. Projects, I just continue. I pray, I read, I'm available to people to help. So I counsel a lot of people nearly every day, so I spend a lot of time on the phone, some people and this or that. Like I said, I do a lot of, kind of theological, spiritual work. And so, studying and writing and things like that. But I think my renewed commitment is really trying to integrate these two things that I've struggled with in my whole life, of just integrating my faith, and who I am as a Christian, as a religious person, and who I am as an artist, and trying to make peace with that. So I kind of have a renewed commitment to be a full-time artist while I'm being a full-time a lot of other things. And I'm married, I have 5 children, and we heard my dog. And so, and just kind of, working through life, through health issues and stuff like that. But more to the point of, this interview is, once again, like every album is a comeback album, and that's kind of how I'm looking at my life. It's sort of a comeback album. It's like I want to finish as much music as possible. Anytime I pick up a guitar or think, I write a new song. And so I just want to make music, poetry, photography, everything, and be the person I think God made me to be.
I love that. Kevin, this has been so cool, so incredible. I'm so honored that you'd come on the podcast and tell me these awesome stories, and just really appreciate not only your music, but being able to get to know you the last couple weeks or so. It's just been an honor. So I want to thank you for that. I really appreciate, again, you coming on the podcast and telling me your story.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and I hope that, we can get to know each other better and keep talking.
Absolutely, man. Well, let's for sure, when I'm in your area, I'll hit you up and vice versa. So awesome. Thank you so much, Kevin.
All right, thanks.
All right.
Hey, thank you, listener, for tuning in again and again. Really appreciate it. Thank you for the likes, the subscribes, the shares, the messages, all that. Thank you again. I know I sound like a broken record, but I really do appreciate it. Thank you to Kevin Clay. Awesome conversation. Thanks so much for your time. It's been really cool to get to know you over the last couple of weeks, and I really deeply appreciate you just opening up and telling me these cool stories. So thank you, Kevin. And got some incredible artists on the horizon, guys, and you know it. Nostalgia is still a hell of a drug.
Oh, hallelujah. Get up right now. I'm hearing something real powerful for someone. And now listen to this.